Hello and thanks for joining us for this episode of Into the Killing. If you have listened to other episodes, you probably know that we're looking for cases to cover on Into the Killing. Specifically, we're looking for cold cases that were eventually solved. We'd also like to hear from you if you know about some crazy true crime stories for our YouTube channel, Criminally Listed. We're also looking for stories about the supernatural and the paranormal for our other YouTube channel, Paranormally Listed. To suggest a case, please visit our website, criminallylisted.com, and then go to the Suggest a Case page. For this week's episode, we're going back to December 1984. On December 4th, 1984, Dr. John Rock died at age 94. Rock and Dr. Gregory Pincus co-developed the combined oral contraceptive pill, which is commonly known just as the pill. Rock didn't seem like the ideal candidate to help Pincus with a contraceptive. According to PBS's American Experience, quote, the highly regarded obstetrician and gynecologist was a devout Roman Catholic and a groundbreaking infertility specialist who devoted much of his career to helping women with fertility problems to conceive. But during Rock's time as a doctor, he also saw the damage of unwanted pregnancy. The pill was introduced in 1950, but it took 10 years before the FDA approved it. Rock then advocated for the Catholic Church to approve the pill, but the Pope chose to condemn it. Rock felt defeated. He used to go to Mass daily, but in his later years, he lost his faith and stopped attending church. Today, the pill is still a very popular form of contraception, with over 100 million women using it. In December 1984, the Finnish hair metal band Hanoi Rocks was going to play 2 shows with Motley Crue in Los Angeles, California. At the time, many people believed that Hanoi Rocks was on the verge of becoming internationally famous, while at the time, Motley Crue was one of the biggest bands on the planet. Motley Crue was as famous for their music as they were for their partying. On December 8, 1984, Hanoi Rocks arrived in Los Angeles, California. Most of the band went to the home of Motley Crue's lead singer, Vince Neil, to party. After several hours of drinking, Neil and Hanoi Rocks drummer, Nicholas Dingley, who went by the stage name Razzle, decided to go to a local liquor store. Neil was drunk when he got behind the wheel. He lost control of his car and slammed into another vehicle. The people in the other car were severely injured and suffered brain damage. 24-year-old Nicholas Dingley was killed. Neil was sentenced to 30 days in jail and paroled after 15 days. After the death of their drummer, Hanoi Rocks never recovered. They broke up in 1985. Meanwhile, Motley Crue continued to have success into the early 1990s. Vince Neil didn't stop his excessive partying. It led to him being kicked out of the band in 1992. In 1996, the band reunited, and Neil has played with them ever since. On December 10, 1984, South African Archbishop Desmond Tutu received the Nobel Prize. He was the Bishop of Johannesburg from 1985 to 1986, and then the Archbishop of Cape Town from 1986 to 1996. He was the first black person to hold those positions. He was a strong opponent of the apartheid and wanted universal suffrage. To get universal suffrage, he promoted foreign economic pressure and peaceful protest. Apartheid finally ended in the early 1990s, and in 1994, South Africa had democratic elections. Archbishop Tutu remained an important figure in South Africa after the election. He died in 2021 at the age of 90. On December 20th, 1984, the number 1 song was Like a Virgin by Madonna. The number 1 movie in America was Beverly Hills Cop, starring Eddie Murphy. Janelle Matthews was born in February 1972 in Santa Barbara, California. Her mother, Terry Vieira, was 13 years old. She immediately gave Jonelle up for adoption. 6 weeks later, she was adopted by Jim and Gloria Matthews. The couple had a 4-year-old daughter, Jennifer. About 6 years later, the family relocated to Greeley, Colorado. At the time, Greeley had a population of about 50,000 people. For 6 years, the family lived in a Greeley suburb. In the winter of 1984, Jim Matthews worked as the school principal at Platte Valley Elementary School in nearby Kersey, Colorado. Gloria was working at a restaurant. Jennifer was 16 and she was attending Greeley Central High School. 12-year-old Janelle was in the 7th grade at Franklin Middle School in Greeley. The family was close-knit and they were heavily involved in their church. The family thought, despite being adopted, Janelle looked like Gloria. They believed that unless someone was told, there would be no way to know that she wasn't their biological child. Janelle knew that she was adopted, but her family treated her like she had been chosen to be in their family. However, Janelle did hope that one day her birth mother would reach out to her. Janelle loved performing and was a member of her school's choir. December 20th, 1984 was the second last day of school before the Christmas holidays. That day, Janelle gave out gifts to her friends at school. On the night of December 20th, Gloria was flying out to Los Angeles to surprise her parents. Her father was ill at the time. She would return home on December 26th, and the family would celebrate Christmas that day. That night, Jennifer had a basketball game at her school. Janelle was singing in a choir concert at a local bank. There would be no audience at the bank. Instead, it was going to be broadcast on a local cable channel. The plan was for Janelle to go to the concert and then come to the high school for the basketball game. However, over the past few days, Janelle had not felt well. So it was decided that she would go home after the concert. Jim dropped Jennifer off at the high school. Then he and Janelle went for dinner at McDonald's. He then dropped her off at her middle school and he went to the high school to watch Jennifer's game. Janelle boarded a bus that took the choir to the bank. They performed on the staircase. When the concert ended, Janelle got a ride with her best friend and her father. They arrived at the Matthews home at around 8:15 p.m. Janelle's friend and her father watched her as she entered her home and turned on a light. Just after 8:30, a teacher at Jim's school called the house and talked to Janelle. She couldn't attend school the next day and she wanted Jim to find her a substitute. Janelle wrote down the message on a message board near the phone. At about 9:30 p.m., Jim returned home. Janelle was not there. The TV was on and his shawl was on a chair near a space heater. Janelle's shoes were close to the chair. Janelle often sat in the chair when she watched TV. About half an hour later, Jennifer arrived home. She had no idea where Janelle was. So Jim called the police. About 15 minutes later, officers arrived and they started the search for Janelle. Soon, friends and family were also searching for the 12-year-old girl. But no trace of Janelle Matthews was found. Gloria called from Los Angeles around 1 a.m. to tell Jim she had arrived safely. He told her that Janelle was missing. She came back to Greeley as quickly as she could, which was the next night. Janelle had still not been found. The police did not find any trace of forced entry or a break-in. They discovered that Janelle's mother's slippers were missing. It's believed that Janelle was wearing them when she went missing. Janelle's friends, family, and teachers were all interviewed. They said there was no chance that she had run away. The police did not find any evidence in the house. The only evidence were footprints in the snow that someone had tried to cover up with a rake that was in the family's garage. The footprints were in the front and backyard. It appeared that someone had been looking and scoping out the house. The rake came from the family's garage. The fact that a rake from the family's garage was used to cover up the footprints was not made public. The investigators quickly concluded that Janelle was kidnapped. One of the first suspects was Janelle's adoptive father, Jim. However, he was eventually ruled out as a suspect. Jim thinks that someone may have lured Janelle out of the house. He said that she was naive. The police located Janelle's birth mother, Terry Vieira, who was living in Los Angeles, California. The police in Los Angeles put surveillance on Vieira. After 6 weeks, it was determined that she was not involved in the kidnapping. They did not inform her that Janelle was missing. Christmas came and went, and the Matthews were still looking for their daughter. February 8, 1985 would have been Janelle's 13th birthday. On that day, over 600 volunteers were searching for her. But again, no new evidence was found. Janelle's disappearance caught the attention of a very important person. On March 7, 1985, at a White House meeting with members of the National Newspaper Association, President Ronald Reagan talked about missing children in America. He then made the following remarks.
Well over 1 million American children disappear from their homes or neighborhoods every year, causing, as we can all understand, heartbreaking anguish. Parents cry out for help, many through letters to me. For example, I learned about Jonelle Matthews of Greeley, Colorado, who would have celebrated a happy 13th birthday with her family just last month. But 5 days before Christmas, Jonelle disappeared from her home. Letters like these touch us deeply, and we've tried our best to help.
On September 11, 1985, Janelle's parents appeared with executives from Dole Foods at a press conference. They were doing a promotion that would bring attention to missing children that involved putting coupon inserts in the newspapers nationwide that included information about missing kids. They would donate 5 cents from each redeemed coupon to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. If 5 million coupons weren't used, they would donate up to $250,000. That same month, a milk company in Iowa put photos and stats of 2 missing boys, 12-year-old Johnny Gosh and 13-year-old Eugene Martin, on the side of their milk cartons. Within months, national dairy brands started putting photos and stats of missing children on the side of their milk cartons. One of the first children to be featured was Janelle Matthews. However, it did not generate any leads, and the case remained cold. In 1994, it had been 10 years since Janelle went missing. Her family had her legally declared dead. On December 20th, 1994, the 10th anniversary of Janelle's disappearance, the family held a memorial service for Janelle. 3 years later, in 1997, Jim and Gloria received a shocking letter in the mail. It reads, "My name is Terry Vieira Martinez. On February 9th, 1972, I gave birth to a girl at Cottage Hospital in Santa Barbara, California. A search consultant recently helped me locate the baby I gave up for adoption. After extensive efforts, it was found that her name is Janelle Matthews. I hope that your hearts will be open for a possible reunion sometime in the future." The letter was heartbreaking for Jim and Gloria. They reached out to Terry and told her what happened. Eventually, Terry and the Matthews became friends. More than 12 years passed, and very little progress was made in the case. In 2013, the case was assigned to a new detective. He enlisted the help of another detective, and they examined all the evidence and notes on the case. The best type of evidence for solving cold cases is DNA evidence. However, there was no DNA evidence in this case. They couldn't even prove that Janelle was dead. An age-progressed photo was released as to what Janelle could have looked like in 2013 when she would have been 42. Much to the dismay of Janelle's family, it did not generate any leads. It seemed like Janelle's case would never be solved, and the Matthews would never know what happened to her. Then, something remarkable happened in July 2019, nearly 34 and a half years after Janelle went missing. In 1984, the 3 biggest movies of the worldwide box office were Beverly Hills Cop, Ghostbusters, and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. In 2019, at the worldwide box office, The 3 top movies were Avengers Endgame, The Lion King, and Frozen 2. 1984's best-selling albums were Born in the USA by Bruce Springsteen, Legend by Bob Marley and the Wailers, and The Purple Rain soundtrack by Prince. In 2019, the 3 best-selling albums were When We All Fall Asleep, Where Do We Go by Billie Eilish, Map of the Soul, 7 by BTS, and Hollywood's Bleeding by Post Malone. In 1984, the top-rated TV shows in the USA were Dynasty, Dallas, and The Cosby Show. In 2019, the most watched shows on network television were NFL Sunday Night Football, NCIS, and NFL Thursday Night Football. Products released in 1984 include Tandy 1000 personal computers, Nike's Air Jordan sneakers, and Sony's Discman. In 2019, for the first time you could buy the Oculus Quest VR system, Apple's AirPod Pros, and pumpkin spice ham. In July 2018, a crew of oil workers were digging to lay some new pipes in a rural area about 50 miles southeast of Janelle's home. They called the police because they had found some human remains under 3 or 4 feet of dirt. They initially thought it was a bag of garbage, but then they saw that it was clothes and bones. There were braces on the teeth. The clothes were the same ones Janelle was wearing when she went missing. The police knew what she was wearing because there was a video recording of her singing with a choir just a few hours before she went missing. DNA testing confirmed it was the remains of 12-year-old Jonelle Matthews. She had been shot once in the forehead. Because of the state of the remains, it was impossible to tell if she had been sexually assaulted. On August 11, 2019, just a few weeks after her remains were found, her family had another memorial service. Afterward, her remains were buried in a cemetery in Greeley. It turned out that the police had a person of interest in the case. His name was Steve Panky, and he lived in Greeley at the time of the murder. Panky put himself on the police's radar in January 1985, nearly a month after Janelle went missing. The Matthews didn't know Panky, but they had attended the same church, but at different times. Panky had been a janitor at the church and lived in a small building on the property. In 1977, Panky was charged with sexually assaulting a member of the church. In June 1978, he was excommunicated from the church. Later that summer, the Matthews started attending the church. Panky supposedly hated the church and held a grudge against the members. The woman who accused him of sexual assault later asked for the charges to be dropped. At the time of the murder, Panky lived less than 2 miles from the Matthews family. Panky's cousin said that several times he got Panky watching kids coming and going from Franklin Middle School, which was Janelle's school. Panky's aunt lived near the school. Years before the kidnapping, in 1980, Panky lived about 10 miles from the spot where Janelle's body was buried. Panky had not been a suspect back then. The police had no reason to suspect him. But on January 19, 1985, Panky called the lead detective on the case. He requested information on the case. He claimed he was a pastor and someone had given him information about Janelle's kidnapping and possible murder. He also slammed his former church and hinted they were responsible for the disappearance. The detective took notes on the call, but wrote Panky off as just another whack job. There is no record of Panky being a pastor. Several people had called the Greeley police on Panky, besides the woman who accused him of sexual assault and unrelated to Janelle's disappearance. In most cases, he was accused of creating a nuisance and harassment. One example was that he caused a scene in a bank and the police were called. The charges were always dismissed. Panky also had another connection with Janelle's case. Between 1978 and 1980, Panky worked at the 7-Up distribution center as a delivery driver. Panky claimed he was fired for trying to start a union. When he was fired, he also said he was beaten up. One man held him while the other hit him. He said that the person who fired him and held him was Russell Ross. Ross was the father of Janelle's best friend, who dropped her off on the night she disappeared. Ross worked at the distribution center as a sales manager. He later said he had nothing to do with Panky's firing because he wasn't his supervisor, and he had nothing to do with him being assaulted if he really was assaulted. When Janelle was murdered, Steve Panky was 33 years old. He was married and he had a son. 2 years after the murder, they moved away from Greeley while his wife was pregnant with their second child. They bounced around a while before ending up in Idaho. Over the years, Panky continued to have problems with the law, and he continued to make odd statements about Janelle. For example, in an appeal filed to the Idaho Court of Appeals, he said he had information about Janelle's murder, but he couldn't reveal it because he learned about it in a confession as his role as a pastor. In 1999, he filed another appeal. It was regarding a conviction for again causing a scene in a bank. The conviction was later dismissed. In the appeal, he said that if he revealed the location of Janelle's body, he would be given the death penalty. Also in the appeal, he revealed he had intimate knowledge of Janelle's neighborhood because he wrote that 2 police officers lived in the neighborhood. Then, in 2013, out of nowhere, he wrote a letter to the district attorney in Greeley claiming he had an alibi for the time of the murder. He gave a lot of detail about what he was supposedly doing that night. He wrote that he was at home with his family. The investigators thought it was odd because why would someone have a vivid memory of that exact night if they had nothing to do with the murder, especially 29 years later? The cold case investigators thought that this was incredibly unusual behavior for an innocent person. They decided to check out what Panky had been up to over the past few years. He was divorced and he had been living in Twin Falls, Idaho. In 2004 and 2008, he ran for sheriff of Lincoln County, Idaho. He lost both times. In 2008, he ran to be the lieutenant governor on the Republican ticket. He lost that too. In 2014, he ran to be the Constitution Party's candidate in the election for governor. According to the Spokesman Review, he described himself as, quote, celibate, a born-again Christian, and Idaho's first openly gay gubernatorial candidate. His own party didn't support him because he supported gay marriage. In 2018, he ran to be the Republican candidate for governor. He got crushed in the voting. In April 2019, months before the body of Janelle was found, one of the investigators called Panky in Twin Falls and told him he was calling about Janelle's case. Panky immediately clammed up and said he wouldn't talk to him without a lawyer. The investigators decided to go to Twin Falls to talk to him, but before they did, Janelle's body was found. Weeks later, in August 2019, Panky called the police and volunteered to give a sample of his DNA. He wanted to prove that he was innocent. The police went to his home and he immediately said that he wanted immunity. The investigators thought that this was as good as a confession because if he did nothing wrong, why else would he need immunity? He refused to talk to the investigators. The police tracked down Panky's ex-wife, Angela Hicks. Hicks was married to Panky at the time of the murder. She said she had visited the Twin Falls police several times to tell them about her suspicions about her ex-husband. She had been told that the information would be passed on to the investigators in Greeley. But the investigators in Greeley never got the information. She told the investigators some bizarre and disturbing things about Panky. For example, he had been physically abusive to her. He also cut her off from her family. She had a good relationship with her father, but Panky forbade her from talking to him anymore. He was also incredibly strange when it came to Janelle's murder. The day after Janelle's disappearance, Panky unexpectedly took her and their son on a vacation for 5 days to California. Before they left, Panky got rid of their 2 dogs, and she never saw them again. They drove to Panky's parents' house in Big Bear, California. The parents were surprised when they arrived because they weren't expecting them. They had mailed their gifts to Greeley. When they drove back, when they got close to Colorado, he made her scan the radio for news about Janelle's disappearance. When they returned to Greeley, he made her go into a grocery store and buy all the copies of the Greeley Tribune and the Denver Post from the past few days. He then had her read all the articles about Janelle's disappearance in the car. After they got home, Panky started digging in the yard. He said that there was a problem with the septic tank. Hicks thought that this was odd because they had just replaced the septic tank the previous year. 2 days later, Hicks smelled smoke and went outside to find the source. She found Panky standing beside a burning car. He told her to mind her own business and return to the house. He then took the remains of the car to a salvage yard. In early 1985, they were at a church, and the minister said that Janelle would be found alive. Panky said, "false prophet," under his breath. Then he stood up and repeated it. He then went to the back of the church and kept saying, "false prophet." He was finally asked to leave the church service. Sometime later, he rambled about snow being raked to the Matthews home. Hicks also found a piece of paper in the trash where he wrote about raked over snow. This was important to the police because the raked over snow was never made public. On July 4, 2008, Hicks and Panky's youngest son, Carl, was shot to death by his girlfriend in Phoenix, Arizona. Hicks told the investigators that at the memorial service, Panky walked up to the urn and said, "I hope God didn't allow this to happen because of Janelle Matthews." Hicks also confirmed that Panky owned a gun at the time of the murder. In September 2018, the police searched Panky's house in Twin Falls and confiscated his devices. From the data on the devices, they learned he had frequently looked up information on Janelle. He did it nearly every day. His activity increased after the body was found. 2 days before he offered to give a sample of his DNA, he had clicked on an article that indicated there was no DNA evidence in the case. So when he offered to give a sample of his DNA, he knew it could be used against him in Janelle's case. Nearly a year went by and the cold case investigators continued to investigate Panky. Panky continued to act oddly. In September 2020, a year after his home was searched, he did an interview with KTVB in Boise, Idaho. He denied having anything to do with Janelle's murder and claimed that the police were framing him. A few weeks later, he sent a statement to KTVB reiterating that he was innocent and being framed. He then gave a list of people he thought were persons of interest in the case. There were 4 people on the list. They were Russell Ross, who dropped off Janelle that night, the mayor of Greeley at the time, and the man who was the chief of police at the time. The 4th person he named was himself. In September 2020, Panky ran for sheriff again. The investigators thought this was a last-ditch effort to stop the investigation. On October 12, 2020, Steve Panky was arrested for the murder of Janelle Matthews. A year later, Panky went to trial for Janelle's murder. Panky's own words, his internet searches, and his ex-wife's testimony were the strongest evidence against him. Panky's defense lawyer pointed out there was no physical evidence that Panky was at the Matthews house that night. He argued that Panky was a suspect because he was fascinated by Janelle's case, and being a true crime enthusiast does not make him guilty of murder. The defense lawyer also presented an alternative suspect. A man named Drake Norris, who supposedly was interested in young girls, was visiting his mother, who lived across the road from the Matthews, the night Janelle was kidnapped. He supposedly left the house around the same time that Janelle was kidnapped. There are several hours where he is unaccounted for. The police interviewed Norris, and he knew that the footprints had been raked. Norris had died in the years since Janelle had been murdered. The jury deliberated for 2 days. They were deadlocked on the first-degree murder and second-degree kidnapping charges. The jury was 9-3 for convicting him. The 3 jury members who voted to acquit said no evidence placed him at the house that night. The district attorney chose to retry him. Panky went to trial again a year later in October 2022. At this trial, Drake Norris's sister testified. She was living with her mother at the time of the murder and was home that night. She said her brother left closer to 10 o'clock. She testified that they had watched a TV special which ended at 9 p.m. Then her brother hung out for a while and didn't leave till after 9:30, which is when Janelle Matthews returned home. The trial lasted nearly a month. Then the jury deliberated for about a day. 71-year-old Steve Panky was found guilty of first-degree murder and second-degree kidnapping. He was sentenced to life in prison with a chance of parole after 20 years. At the time of this recording, 72-year-old Steve Panky is incarcerated at the Arkansas Valley Correctional Facility in Ordway, Colorado. He can apply for parole in November 2040 when he'll be 89 years old. One question many people have about the case is why did Panky kill Janelle? Motive was not something the district attorney needed to prove in court. However, the investigators believe that Panky was an extraordinarily vindictive man. He was still angry at the church for excommunicating him, so he killed Janelle to get back at them. They also allege that Panky was racist and he may have killed Janelle because she was Latino. The investigators said that if Panky had never said anything about Janelle's murder, he probably would have never been caught. But he was cocky, and he thought he was smarter than the police, so he taunted them for years. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you have a case you'd like us to cover, please don't forget to visit our website, criminallylisted.com. But that's all for this week. Thank you again for listening. Please be safe and take care of yourself.